5 days before my 32nd birthday, I walked into my parents' sprawling lakeside mansion expecting a quiet family dinner. Instead, a thick contract slid across the polished oak table with one ultimatum: sign it, or leave forever. My father's cold eyes, my mother's calculated smile, my brother's smug grin, they all believed they'd cornered their naive daughter, but they had no idea I wasn't the helpless girl they thought they knew. Hidden in my back pocket was a weapon they could never control, $10 million they didn't know existed. My name is Claire Winters, and until that November evening, I still believed family meant something more than leverage and control. The dining room of my parents' lakeside mansion gleamed under the crystal chandelier, each facet casting rainbow fragments across the mahogany walls, the same walls that had witnessed 32 years of my life, most of them spent being invisible. Tonight, however, I was the center of attention and not in the way I'd ever wanted. "Sit down, Claire." My father, Richard Winters, commanded from the head of the table. His voice carried the same authority he used in courtrooms across Minneapolis, the kind that made grown CEOs squirm. Beside him, my mother Evelyn adjusted her pearl necklace with perfectly manicured fingers, her smile as cold as the November wind rattling the windows. Brandon, my older brother, lounged in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no in his 35 years of existence. He twirled his wine glass, watching me with barely concealed amusement. I took my usual seat, the one facing the lake, where I'd spent countless dinners staring at the water rather than engaging in their conversations about Brandon's latest promotion, or Mother's charity galas where my absence was always noted but never mourned. "We need to discuss your future," Richard began, sliding a thick manila folder across the polished table. The sound it made, that whisper of paper against wood, would haunt me for weeks. My future. I kept my voice steady, though my pulse quickened. I wasn't aware it needed discussing. Evelyn's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Oh, darling, everything needs discussing when you're 32 and still playing with your little computer programs." Little computer programs. That's what she called my medical technology company, the one I'd built from nothing, the one that had just secured its third patent. But to them, if it didn't have the Winters name stamped on it, it didn't matter. "Open it," Brandon said, nodding toward the folder. "Trust me, you'll want to see this." I flipped open the folder, and my blood turned to ice. It wasn't a discussion about my future. It was a contract, a prenuptial agreement, to be exact, but not for any marriage I knew about. As I scanned the dense legal text, the reality crashed over me like a wave. "You're joking," I said, though I knew they never joked about money or control. "The Morrison family has agreed to the match," Richard stated, as if discussing a business merger. "Their son needs a wife with the right pedigree, and you need stability. The contract ensures everyone's interests are protected." Protected. I almost laughed. The contract stripped me of everything: any current assets, any future earnings, any decision-making power. It even included a clause about children, scheduling my reproductive future like board meetings. And if I refuse, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Then you're no longer welcome in this family," Evelyn said, her voice sweet as poison. "No inheritance, no family name, no support. You walk out that door with nothing but the clothes on your back." "You have 5 minutes to decide," Richard added, checking his Rolex. "Sign it or get out." Brandon leaned forward, his grin widening. "Come on, Claire. You can't possibly think you have other options. What are you going to do? Support yourself with your hobby?" I stared at the contract, then at their faces, 3 masks of certainty, absolutely convinced they had me cornered. They thought I was the same scared little girl who used to hide in her room during their dinner parties, the daughter who'd never quite measured up to their expectations. My fingers traced the signature line at the bottom of the contract. 5 minutes to sign away my life, or lose the only family I'd ever known. Except they weren't really family. Were they family doesn't ambush you with ultimatums? Family doesn't sell you to the highest bidder. I need a pen, I said quietly. Richard smiled the same smile he wore after winning a case. Evelyn relaxed into her chair. Brandon raised his glass in a mock toast. They thought they'd won. They had no idea that Claire Winters, the disappointment, the afterthought, the daughter who played with little computer programs, was about to teach them the real meaning of loss. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but instead of signing, I set it down and looked at each of them in turn. Before I make any decision, I think I deserve to know why now. Why this sudden urgency to marry me off? Richard's jaw tightened a tell I'd learned to recognize from years of watching him prepare for cases, but it was Brandon who answered, unable to resist the opportunity to twist the knife. Because you're becoming an embarrassment, he said, swirling his wine. 32. Unmarried. Wasting your time on that startup nonsense. Do you know what people say at the country club? They ask Mother why her daughter insists on pretending to be something she's not. Pretending. The word hung in the air like a slap. I thought back to when I was 8, presenting my first science fair project, a simple computer program I'd coded myself. Richard had barely glanced at it before asking Brandon about his football game. When I was 16 and accepted into MIT's summer program, Evelyn's only response was to worry about who would help with her garden party. When I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in biomedical engineering, they'd spent the entire celebration dinner discussing Brandon's promotion to junior partner at Richard's firm. Remember when grandfather was sick? I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. Evelyn's face darkened. Charles has nothing to do with this, but he had everything to do with it. Grandfather Charles had been the only one who'd ever really seen me. While the rest of the family dismissed my interests as phases, he'd spent hours listening to my ideas about medical technology, about devices that could help people like him manage chronic conditions with dignity. He left me something, didn't he? I continued, watching their faces carefully. Something you couldn't control. A pittance, Richard said too quickly. Some sentimental jewelry and a few $1,000s. Nothing compared to what you're throwing away if you refuse this contract. A few $1,000s. They didn't know. They genuinely didn't know about the $5 million in bonds and stocks he'd quietly transferred to a trust in my name, along with his final letter, build what they can't steal. My dear Claire, your mind is your greatest inheritance. That $5 million had been the seed money for LifeStride Systems. While they thought I was playing with computers in some garage, I'd been developing revolutionary monitoring devices for cardiac patients. While they mocked my absence from their social events, I'd been in meetings with venture capitalists and FDA consultants. While they planned my future without me, I'd been building an empire they couldn't even imagine. You never once asked what my company does, I said, standing up from the table. Not once in 3 years. Sit down, Richard commanded. You're being emotional. I'm being emotional. I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. You ambush me with a contract to sell me off like cattle, and I'm the emotional one. It's not selling, Evelyn began, but I cut her off. What would you call it then? Mother, a strategic alliance, a merger. Everything is business to you people, isn't it? Even your own daughter. Brandon stood up too, his face flushing red. You should be grateful. Do you have any idea how hard Father worked to arrange this? The Morrison family doesn't accept just anyone. Then give them my regrets, I said, pushing the contract back across the table. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face turned from red to purple. Evelyn's perfectly composed mask finally cracked, showing the fury beneath. Brandon looked like someone had just told him the sky was green. You're making a mistake, Richard said, his voice low and dangerous. If you walk out that door without signing this, you're done. No trust fund, no family name, no protection. You'll be nobody. Nobody. They thought that was a threat. They couldn't conceive that being nobody in their world meant being somebody in mine. I need to think, I said, picking up my coat. This is a lot to process. You have until tomorrow night, Richard said. 8 p.m. sharp. Sign the contract, or don't bother coming back. As I walked toward the door, Evelyn called out, Claire, don't be foolish. You can't survive without us. I paused at the threshold, my hand on the doorknob. 3 years ago, she might have been right, but grandfather had known something they didn't, that I was never meant to survive in their world. I was meant to build my own. Tomorrow night, then, I said without turning around. 8 p.m. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but in my mind, it sounded like thunder. The drive from my parents' mansion to my downtown Minneapolis loft took 35 minutes, but rage made it feel like seconds. I burst through my door at 9:45 p.m., throwing my keys onto the marble counter with enough force to send them skittering across the surface. Whoa, what did those keys do to you? Marissa's voice came from my couch, where she was curled up with her laptop, apparently having let herself in with her spare key again. Marissa had been my roommate at MIT and the only person who knew the full truth about LifeStride systems. While my family thought she was just another one of my peculiar friends, she was actually my company's chief technology officer and held 15% equity. They tried to sell me, I said, collapsing into the armchair across from her. She closed her laptop immediately. What? I told her everything: the contract, the Morrison family, the ultimatum. With each word, her expression grew darker until she looked ready to commit murder. Those bastards, she breathed. They're actually treating you like property. This is 2025, not 1825. They don't see it that way, I said, rubbing my temples. To them, it's just business. Another transaction for the Winters family portfolio. Claire? Marissa moved to the edge of the couch, her eyes intense. They don't know about the company, do they? About the valuation. They think I'm playing with computers in a garage somewhere. Playing with? She laughed bitterly. You just got FDA approval for the Cardio Watch system. We have purchase orders from 3 major hospital networks. The company valuation just hit $10.3 million, and they think you're playing. To them, if it doesn't have their stamp of approval, it doesn't exist. Marissa stood up, pacing now, her brilliant mind already working through possibilities. You need Harold. Tonight. Harold Graves was more than just my lawyer. He was grandfather Charles's best friend and the one who'd helped me structure LifeStride to be completely independent of the Winters family reach. At 73, he was semi-retired, but he'd never forgotten Charles's dying wish to protect me from my family's machinations. I checked my watch, 10:15 p.m. It's late. Call him anyway. This is exactly the kind of situation Charles was afraid of. She was right. I dialed Harold's number, and he answered on the second ring, sounding perfectly alert despite the hour. Claire. What's wrong? They want me to sign a contract, a prenuptial agreement for a marriage they arranged. There was a pause. Then, I'll be at your apartment in 20 minutes. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything, and start gathering every document related to LifeStride systems. While we waited, Marissa helped me pull together everything in corporation papers, patent documentation, bank statements, the recent valuation report from our Series A funding round. My dining table became a war room covered in evidence of what I'd built without my family's knowledge or help. Harold arrived exactly 20 minutes later, looking like he'd just stepped out of a courtroom despite the late hour. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his suit immaculate. He took one look at the marriage contract I'd photographed on my phone, and his expression turned to stone. This isn't just a prenuptial agreement, he said after reading it through twice. This is legal enslavement. They're not just taking your assets, they're taking your agency, your future earnings, everything. Can they do this? Marissa asked. They can try, Harold said, then turned to me. But they've made a critical error. They don't know about your company, which means they don't know you have the resources to fight back. I don't want to just fight back, I said, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. I want to destroy their entire plan. Harold studied me for a long moment, then smiled the same smile Grandfather Charles used to have when he was about to make a particularly clever move in chess. Then we don't just refuse their contract, he said, pulling out his legal pad. We present them with our own, a reverse Uno, if you will. What kind of contract? I asked. A family separation agreement. You'll formally dissociate yourself from the Winters family enterprises, waiving any claim to their assets which they'll love, but in exchange, they waive any claim to yours, present and future. They sign away any right to LifeStride systems or any other ventures you create. They'll never sign that, I said. They will, Harold said confidently, when you reveal what you're actually worth. Right now, they think they hold all the cards. They believe you're desperate, penniless without them. But when they realize you're already successful, more successful than Brandon, possibly more successful than Richard himself in a few years, their entire worldview will shatter. Marissa grinned. It's perfect. They can't claim credit for your success, can't control it, can't even touch it. We'll need everything ready by tomorrow night, Harold said, already making notes. Financial statements, company valuations, patent documentation, major contracts. We're going to walk in there and show them exactly who Claire Winters really is. As they planned and strategized, something shifted inside me. The hurt and anger transformed into something colder, more focused. This wasn't just about refusing their contract anymore. This was about showing them that the daughter they'd dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated had become everything they never thought possible. One more thing, Harold said as he prepared to leave at midnight. Wear your best suit tomorrow, not the one they bought you, something you purchased with your own money. You're not going as their daughter. You're going as a CEO. The next morning arrived with unseasonable November sunshine, as if the universe itself was spotlighting what was about to unfold. I stood in my home office at 6:30 surrounded by documents that told the real story of Claire Winters, not the disappointing daughter, but the founder and CEO of a company that was about to revolutionize cardiac care. Harold arrived at 7 sharp with his paralegal, Jennifer, and we began assembling our counterproposal with surgical precision. Every document was copied in triplicate, every financial statement verified, every patent certificate prominently displayed. We need the quarterly revenue projections, Harold said, reviewing our checklist, and the letters of intent from Cleveland Clinic and Johns Hopkins. I pulled up the files on my laptop, watching the numbers that still sometimes didn't feel real. $3.2 million in projected revenue for next quarter alone, purchase orders that would put our devices in 43 hospitals by year's end. Claire, Jennifer said, looking up from the bank statements. Your personal account balance, is this correct? Which one? I asked, then realized she was looking at my operating account. Yes, that's just the liquid assets. The rest is in investment portfolios and the company shares. She whistled low. Your family has no idea. Do they? They're about to, Harold said grimly. As we worked, memories kept surfacing, little moments that had led to this. The Christmas when I was 23, excitedly telling them about my breakthrough in sensor technology, only to have Richard interrupt to ask Brandon about his golf tournament. The family reunion where Evelyn introduced me as our Claire, still figuring things out, while I had a patent pending. The countless dinners where they mapped out Brandon's future while treating mine as an afterthought. I want to add something, I said suddenly, a non-disclosure clause. If they sign this, they can never publicly claim credit for my success or association with LifeStride systems. Harold smiled approvingly. Excellent addition. They love their reputation. Let's make sure they can't polish it with your achievements. By noon, we had everything ready. The documents filled a leather portfolio that cost more than my parents had given me for my last 5 birthdays combined. Inside was proof that their dismissible daughter was worth $10.3 million and climbing. There's something else, I said, pulling out a manila folder I'd kept separate. Grandfather's letter, the original. Harold took it reverently. Charles's handwriting was still clear despite his illness when he'd written it. My dearest Claire, they will try to dim your light to make theirs shine brighter. Don't let them. build something they cannot steal, cannot claim, cannot control. Your mind is your inheritance, and it's worth more than all their money combined." He knew, Harold said softly. He always knew this day would come. That afternoon, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, applying makeup with steady hands. The woman looking back at me wasn't the scared girl who used to hide in her room during family gatherings. She wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit I'd bought with my first major contract payment. Her grandmother's pearl earrings the only family heirloom that truly felt like mine, and an expression of absolute calm. Marissa appeared in the doorway. "You look like you're about to conquer the world." "Just a small part of it," I said, applying lipstick in a shade called Fearless. "Appropriate." "I've been thinking," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "They're going to lose it when they see those numbers. Your father might actually have a stroke." "He'll recover," I said dryly. "He always does." "And your mother?" I thought about Evelyn's perfectly controlled world, where everything had its place and daughters were meant to be decorative, not disruptive. She'll pretend it doesn't matter while secretly seething that she can't brag about it at the country club. And Brandon, I met Marissa's eyes in the mirror. Brandon's going to realize he's not the golden child anymore, that his little sister, the one he called a waste of potential, is worth more than he'll make in the next 5 years. Marissa grinned. God, I wish I could be there to see it. "Harold will be," I said, turning to face her. "He's meeting me there as my legal counsel. They think I'm coming alone and desperate. Instead, I'm coming with ammunition." As I gathered the portfolio and prepared to leave, I looked around my loft, my sanctuary, purchased with my own money, decorated with my own taste, filled with prototypes and whiteboards covered in algorithms. This was my real home. The mansion by the lake had only ever been a stage for their performance of the perfect family. "Hey, Claire," Marissa called as I reached the door. "Whatever happens tonight, you've already won. You know that, right? You built something incredible without them." I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt in 24 hours. "I know, but tonight, they're going to know it too." The leather portfolio felt solid in my hands as I walked to the elevator, not just papers, but proof. Proof that being nobody in their world had freed me to become somebody in mine. Proof that Grandfather Charles had been right to believe in me. Proof that Claire Winters wasn't just surviving without her family's support, she was thriving beyond their wildest imagination. Tonight, at 8 p.m. sharp, the family that tried to sell me was about to learn they never owned me in the first place. The gravel crunched under my Tesla's tires as I pulled into the circular driveway at 7:50 p.m. Harold's BMW was already there, parked strategically where my family would see it from the dining room windows. I took a moment to steady myself, gripping the leather portfolio that contained my ammunition. The house looked exactly as it always had, imposing, perfect, a monument to the Winters family success. But tonight, I wasn't approaching it as a daughter seeking approval. I was approaching it as an equal. They didn't know existed. Margaret, our housekeeper of 20 years, opened the door. Her eyes widened slightly at my appearance, the suit, the posture, something different in my expression. "Miss Claire," she said softly, and I caught something in her tone, maybe respect, maybe warning. "They're in the dining room. Thank you. Margaret." I squeezed her hand gently as I passed. She'd seen enough Winters family dramas to know tonight would be memorable. The dining room doors were closed, but I could hear voices inside Richard's commanding baritone, Evelyn's crystalline laugh, Brandon's confident drawl. They were celebrating already, certain of their victory. I pushed open both doors simultaneously, making an entrance they hadn't expected. The scene was perfectly staged, just like the night before, candles flickering, wine already poured, the marriage contract placed precisely where I would sit. But this time, there was a new addition, an elderly man in an expensive suit who must have been Morrison Sr., and a younger man who was presumably my intended husband. "Claire." Evelyn stood, her smile bright and false. Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet. We'll have time for introductions later, I said, my voice cutting through her performance. First, I believe we have business to discuss. Richard frowned at my tone, but before he could speak, Harold entered behind me, his presence immediately shifting the room's dynamic. How, Harold? Richard's voice sharpened. What are you doing here? Representing my client, Harold said smoothly, taking a position beside me. Miss Winters asked me to review the contract you presented last night. There's nothing to review, Brandon interjected, his face already flushing. She signs it or she's out. Simple. Actually, I said, setting my portfolio on the table with deliberate weight. It's not simple at all. Please, everyone sit. This won't take long. Morrison Sr. looked confused, his son irritated. Good. Let them wonder why their arranged bride wasn't following the script. Claire, you're embarrassing yourself, Evelyn hissed, her perfect composure cracking. The Morrisons should know exactly what they're getting, I interrupted, opening the portfolio. Or rather, what they're not getting. I pulled out the first document, the Certificate of Incorporation for Lifestride Systems. This is my company. Founded 3 years ago with inheritance from Grandfather Charles. Not Winter's money specifically left to me. Outside of family control. Richard's face went pale. What company? The one you never asked about, I said, pulling out the patent certificates. 3 patents for revolutionary cardiac monitoring devices. FDA approval received 6 months ago. Current contracts with Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins, and Mount Sinai. This is ridiculous. Brandon started to stand, but Harold raised a hand. Please, let her finish. You'll want to hear this. I laid out the financial statements next, each page a deliberate revelation. Current company valuation $10.3 million. Projected revenue for next quarter $3.2 million. Personal liquid assets. I placed the bank statements down like playing cards, sufficient to buy this house twice over. The silence was absolute. Morrison Sr.'s mouth had fallen open. His son looked like he'd been slapped. Evelyn gripped her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter, but it was Richard's face that told the whole story. Shock, disbelief, and then something worse, the realization that he'd lost control. You've been lying to us, he said, his voice dangerous. No, I replied calmly. I've been building something while you weren't paying attention. There's a difference. This changes nothing, Evelyn said, though her voice wavered. The marriage arrangement is hereby declined, I said, turning to the Morrisons. I apologize for wasting your evening, but I won't be signing any marriage contract. I'm sure you understand that a woman of my means needs to be selective about her partnerships. Morrison Sr. stood abruptly. Richard, you said she needed this arrangement. You said she had no prospects, no income. He said what he believed. I cut in smoothly. He just never bothered to verify it. The younger Morrison was already heading for the door, his father close behind. We'll discuss this later. Winters. Morrison Sr. said coldly, This is not what we agreed to. As the door closed behind them, I turned back to my family. Brandon's face was purple with rage. Evelyn looked faint, and Richard looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. However, I said, pulling out the final document, the one Harold and I had crafted that morning, I do have a contract for you to consider. Harold stepped forward. A family separation agreement, clean, simple, and mutual. The Winters family relinquishes any claim to Claire's current and future assets, including Lifestride Systems. In return, Claire waives any claim to the Winters family trust, properties, or businesses. You can't be serious, Brandon sputtered. I'm completely serious, I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn. You wanted me out. This makes it official, but on my terms, not yours. The separation agreement lay on the table like a gauntlet thrown down, its crisp white pages reflecting the candlelight. For 30 seconds, No one moved. Then Richard reached for it, his lawyer's instincts overriding his shock. As he read, I watched his expression shift from disbelief to calculation to something approaching panic. He was seeing what Harold had crafted an ironclad document that would sever me from the Winters family permanently, but more importantly, would sever them from any claim to my success. "This is absurd," he finally said, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "You're trying to blackmail us." "Blackmail?" I laughed, and the sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "You tried to force me into marriage with a contract that would have stripped me of everything. I'm offering a clean break. That's more generous than you deserve." "You ungrateful," Brandon started, but I turned on him with years of suppressed fury. "Ungrateful for what?" "Exactly. For the years of being told I wasn't good enough, for watching you get celebrated for mediocrity while my achievements were ignored, for being treated like a bargaining chip to salvage whatever deal you've screwed up with the Morrisons." "How dare you speak to your brother that way?" Evelyn snapped, finding her voice again. "He's not my brother after tonight," I said coldly. "None of you are anything to me after tonight unless you sign that agreement." Harold cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss the implications." "The implications are clear," Richard interrupted, his courtroom persona reasserting itself. "You think you can waltz in here with some startup money and dictate terms to us. We're the Winters family. We built an empire." "You built a law firm," I corrected. "A successful one. Yes, but hardly an empire. And Brandon, he's a junior partner riding on your coattails. Meanwhile, I built something from nothing. Something that's mine alone. That money from Charles was meant for the family," Evelyn said, her mask fully cracked now, showing the desperate woman beneath. "He had no right." "He had every right," Harold interjected firmly. Charles Thompson's will was specific. That money was Claire's alone, held in trust until her 25th birthday. No family claims, no strings attached. He knew exactly what he was doing. I pulled out Grandfather's letter, the one I'd kept in my safe for 3 years. "Would you like to know what he wrote Claire, my brilliant granddaughter? They will try to cage your spirit and claim your victories. Don't let them. Build something beyond their reach." He saw this coming. He saw all of it. "That senile old fool," Richard muttered, and something in me snapped. That senile old fool was the only real family I had in this house. My voice rose for the first time. He was the only one who saw me as more than a disappointment or an asset to trade. "And with his help, I've built something you could never imagine because you were too busy looking down on me to see what I was capable of." Brandon slammed his hand on the table. "You think you're so special, one lucky break with some medical gadget, and suddenly you're better than us." "It's not luck," I said quietly. "Dangerously. It's 3 years of 18-hour days. It's sleeping in my office while running trials. It's risking everything on an idea while you were playing golf at the country club. And it's not one gadget, it's a suite of devices that will save thousands of lives." "The cardio watch system," Harold added helpfully, "has been called the most significant advancement in cardiac monitoring in a decade." The American Heart Association. Enough. Richard stood towering over the table. "You want to leave fine. Get out. But you'll get nothing from us. No support. No family name." "The family name?" I laughed again, harder this time. "Richard, I haven't used the Winters name professionally in 3 years. Every contract, every patent, every achievement, it's all under Claire Thompson, Grandfather's name. The only name in this family worth carrying." Evelyn gasped as if I'd slapped her. "You changed your name, legally, 6 months ago." I confirmed. "The Winters name means nothing to me anymore. It never opened doors. It only reminded people that I was Richard's disappointing daughter or Brandon's overshadowed sister." "You little—" Brandon lunged forward, but Harold stepped between us. "Assault would be inadvisable," he said mildly, "especially given that Miss Thompson's company has an excellent legal team." I gathered my documents, leaving only the separation agreement on the table. "You have 48 hours to review and sign. After that, The offer expires, and I'll proceed with a public dissociation announcement. Imagine the headlines, Tech CEO severs ties with prominent legal family. I'm sure the country club will have opinions. You wouldn't dare, Evelyn whispered. Try me, I said, meeting her gaze steadily. You taught me that reputation is everything. How do you think yours will fare when people learn you tried to sell your daughter to cover Brandon's business failures? The accusation hung in the air like a bomb. Brandon's face went from red to white. Richard's jaw clenched. I'd guessed right there was more to this Morrison deal than just marrying me off. Oh, yes, I continued, seeing their reactions. Did you think I wouldn't figure it out? The urgency, the specific family, the ironclad contract. Brandon lost something big, didn't he? And the Morrisons were your solution? Trade your worthless daughter to fix your golden son's mistakes. It wasn't like that, Brandon said weakly, all his bravado gone. Wasn't it? I picked up my portfolio, feeling the weight of everything I'd built without them. Sign the agreement or don't. Either way, I'm done being a Winters. I'm done being your disappointment. And I'm done pretending we're a family. Harold moved toward the door, but I remained standing at the head of the table, the spot where Richard usually held court. The power shift was deliberate, and everyone in the room felt it. Before I leave, I said, my voice steady as steel, let's be completely clear about what happens next. Richard started to speak, but I raised my hand, a gesture I'd learned from watching him silence opponents in courtroom videos. He actually stopped, too shocked by my audacity to continue. If you sign the agreement, we all walk away clean. You keep your reputation, your country club status, your perfect family facade. I keep my company, my success, and my freedom from this toxic charade you call love. Toxic. Evelyn's voice cracked. We gave you everything. You gave me a roof and food, the legal minimum required of parents. Everything else, affection, encouragement, belief that was conditional on me being who you wanted me to be? Well, congratulations. I'm exactly who I want to be, and it has nothing to do with any of you. Brandon laughed bitterly. You think you've won something here. You're alone, Claire. Completely alone. No family, no support system. I have a support system. I interrupted. I have mentors who actually respect my work. I have colleagues who value my input. I have friends who celebrate my successes instead of diminishing them. I have a found family that chose me for who I am, not what they could get from me. Found family? Richard scoffed. That's not real family. Real family. I turned to face him fully. Was it real family when you missed my MIT graduation because Brandon had a golf tournament? Was it real family when Mother told everyone at the charity gala that I was between opportunities while I was negotiating my first patent? Was it real family when you tried to prostitute me to save Brandon's career? How dare Brandon started, but I cut him off. I looked into it, I said, pulling out my phone. Morrison Industries, the failed merger with your firm, the leaked documents that cost them millions, documents that came from your computer. Brandon, you nearly destroyed their company through incompetence, and Daddy's solution was to offer me as compensation. The silence was deafening. Even Harold looked surprised I hadn't told him about this final piece of research. That's not, Brandon stammered. It's exactly what happened, I said, reading from my phone. I have a very interesting email thread here, obtained legally through the discovery process of a related lawsuit. Would you like me to read your father's exact words? My daughter would be a valuable addition to your family, and her union with your son would cement our family's interests moving forward. Richard's face had gone from red to ashen. How did you get access to those emails the same way I built a $10 million company? By being smarter than you gave me credit for. I put my phone away. Sign the agreement, or this becomes public. Your choice. You're threatening us now. Evelyn stood, shaking with rage. This is extortion. No. Harold interjected calmly. It's negotiation. something your husband should recognize, being a lawyer. You poisoned her against us, Richard said, turning on Harold. Charles always favored her, and you continued his work. Charles loved her. Harold said simply, something you might have tried. The words hung in the air like an indictment. For a moment, I saw something flicker across Evelyn's face. Regret, but it was gone instantly, replaced by her usual cold composure. If we sign, she said slowly, you disappear. No contact, no claims, no using the family connection for publicity. I already don't use the family connection, I reminded her. But yes, I'll disappear from your lives completely. It's what you wanted anyway, just not on these terms. And if we don't sign? Richard asked, though he already knew the answer. Then I go public with everything. The forced marriage, the Morrison scandal, Brandon's incompetence, and the fact that you were willing to sell your daughter to fix it. I have media contacts through my company tech journalists who would love a story about a female CEO overcoming family betrayal. You would destroy us, Brandon said, disbelief in his voice. The same way you tried to destroy me, I replied. The difference is, I'm giving you a choice. That's more than you ever gave me. I moved toward the door where Harold was waiting. 48 hours. Harold's office. Sign it, and we all move forward separately. Don't sign it, and I'll protect my interests by any means necessary. Claire, Evelyn called out, and for the first time in my life, she sounded vulnerable. Is this really what you want to have no family at all? I turned back one final time, looking at the three people who should have been my strongest supporters, but had instead been my greatest obstacles. I haven't had a family for years, I said quietly. The only difference is that now, neither of us has to pretend anymore. You'll regret this, Richard said, finding his voice again. When you need us, I won't, I said with absolute certainty. I've built everything without you. I've succeeded despite you. The only thing I need from you now is your signature on that agreement. And then what? Brandon asked bitterly. You just vanish. Pretend we never existed. Yes, I said simply. That's exactly what I do. I continue building my company, saving lives with my technology, and creating the future I chose for myself, while you continue being exactly who you've always been. Except now, you'll know that the daughter you overlooked, the sister you dismissed, the disappointment you tried to sell, she was worth more than all of you combined. I walked out of that dining room with Harold beside me, our footsteps echoing through the marble foyer. Margaret stood by the door, and as I passed, she whispered, "Good for you, Miss Claire." I squeezed her hand one last time, knowing I'd never see her again. The November air hit my face like freedom itself, sharp, cold, and absolutely liberating. Harold paused by his car, studying my face in the glow of the mansion's exterior lights. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "I'm better than all right," I said, and meant it. For the first time in my life, I'm free. "They'll sign," he said with certainty. "They have too much to lose, not to." He was right. 36 hours later, Harold called to confirm that all 3 signatures were on the separation agreement. They hadn't even tried to negotiate. The fear of public humiliation, their greatest weakness, had won. I never spoke to them again. 6 months later, LifeStride Systems completed its Series B funding at a valuation of $35 million. The Cardio Watch system was being implemented in hospitals across the country, saving lives every single day. My team had grown to 50 employees, each one handpicked for their brilliance and dedication. I was in my office reviewing expansion plans when Marissa knocked and entered with a peculiar expression. "You need to see this," she said, handing me her tablet. It was a Minneapolis Society blog, covering some charity gala. There in the photos was my family Richard, Evelyn, and Brandon smiling for the cameras. The article mentioned Richard's successful law firm, Brandon's recent promotion, and Evelyn's charitable work. Not a word about a daughter. It was as if I'd never existed. "You okay?" Marissa asked. I handed back the tablet. Perfect. They got what they wanted, a family without disappointments. And I got what I wanted, a life without chains. A year after that night, Forbes featured me in their 30 Under 35 issue. The article called me a self-made medical technology pioneer and noted that I'd built my empire entirely through personal funding and strategic partnerships, without family connections or traditional venture capital. The morning the article came out, Harold called. "They saw it," he said simply. "Richard contacted me about potentially revisiting the agreement." "No," I said without hesitation. "The agreement stands. Forever." He mentioned that Brandon's firm lost the Morrison account permanently, and 3 other major clients followed when word got out about what really happened. I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No sympathy. Nothing. They were strangers now, living with consequences of their own making. 5 years have passed since that November night. LifeStride Systems is now valued at over $200 million. We've expanded internationally, with offices in London, Tokyo, and Singapore. Our technology has helped diagnose critical heart conditions in over 1 million patients worldwide. I built a new life, piece by piece. I bought a house in Seattle, overlooking the water, nothing like the cold mansion by the lake. I filled it with warmth, with friends who became family, with laughter that wasn't performative. I dated on my own terms, choosing partners who saw me as an equal, not an acquisition. Sometimes, usually late at night when I'm working on a new design, I think about Grandfather Charles, how he saw something in me that my own parents couldn't, how that $5 million he left me wasn't just money, it was belief. It was freedom. It was the chance to prove that I was never the disappointment they thought I was. The last I heard, through professional channels, Richard was still practicing law, though his firm never quite recovered from losing the Morrison account and the subsequent clients. Evelyn still attended her charity galas, though whispers followed her now about the daughter no one mentioned. Brandon struggled to make partner at a smaller firm, his incompetence no longer shielded by his father's influence. They got exactly what they demanded that night, a family without me in it. And I got something infinitely more valuable, a life where my worth wasn't determined by my last name, where my achievements weren't diminished to protect someone else's ego, where my success was entirely my own. Standing in my office now, looking out at the Seattle skyline, I sometimes wonder if they ever Google my name, if they ever see the articles, the awards, the lives saved by technology they called playing with computers. I wonder if they feel regret, but mostly, I don't think about them at all, because the best revenge isn't just success. It's success that doesn't need their validation, their approval, or their existence to be complete. That night, they demanded I sign their contract or get out. They thought they were taking everything from me. They had no idea they were setting me free. And my $10 million, it's worth over $200 million now. But the real value was never in the money. It was in discovering that the family who tried to break me only revealed how unbreakable I'd always been. The contract they wanted me to sign would have made me property. The one I made them sign made me untouchable. And that's the difference between winning and winning everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story of family betrayal and ultimate triumph. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up to family who didn't believe in you? How did you find your own path? Your stories inspire me to keep sharing these narratives of strength and success.